Darkhorses, if you weren't here last week, Dark Horse recap, here it is. Someone who's unexpected, or an unexpected winner. And we talked about basically God uses unlikely people to accomplish his plan. And we can look all throughout the Bible at different people throughout God's word. From Rahab, we've talked about all sorts of different people throughout God's word. Samson, Gideon, we have people that weren't necessarily the best and brightest, but God used them. And so we are going to be looking at different people. Last week we looked at Debo, right? Deborah, whatever you want to call her, lady in her palm tree. I think we got a picture of her too. It's actually just a drawing. It's not like a photograph. That's what someone thought it looked like. There was one I couldn't get because it was way too tiny. But she was leaning on her tree. And it's who in the world would give advice like that? I don't know, but they thought she would. But so we talked about Deborah last week. We talked about how she was used to throw off the cruel oppression that was happening for over 20 years, and God used her wisdom to do that. And so God used an unlikely person there. And so the big thought that, hey, you don't have to be the best and brightest for God to use you is good news for us, because as awesome as I think you guys are, and as awesome as you probably think I am, we are probably not the best and brightest of the world. It's okay, right? God doesn't need you to be the absolute smartest person, most athletic, best speaker, most gifted, whatever. God will use people that everyone else sees as unlikely. And so last week was Deborah, and we've been looking at what does it take for God to use us. This week, we're going to look at how God used a third grader to change a nation, okay? And so we are going to be in 2 Chronicles 34. If you have your Bible, you can turn there, and we'll be in verse 1. That's where we're going to start. But here's what's going on. Chronicles, the book of Chronicles are chronicles, basically the history book. Here's kind of almost the historical timeline of what happened in Israel. A lot of it has to do with kings. It's this is what happened in the reign of this king, and this king, this king, and they just walk through. And so you can look back through, for the sake of time, we won't do that in here, but most of the kings that pop up in here, bad dudes, right? So you can just keep the hand out. We're not going to stop for that. All right, so judges, we talked about, God's people had judges before they had a king, right? They didn't have a king. God said, hey, I will use these judges to do what I need to do. And the people, they got kind of just tired of that. We really want a king. Everyone else is a king. It's like kids at Christmas time. I want a PlayStation 5. My friend got one. I need one too, right? That same sort of thing. Everyone else is a king. We think we should have a king, and we want one. God said, that's not what's best. I am your king. You don't need anything else. They said, well, we want it, and we want it now. And so he said, fine, I'm going to let you have a king. And pretty much every king that ruled Israel was a horrible, horrible king and did awful, awful things. And so we will read here in a second, we'll read that this guy that we are going to talk about did what was good in the eyes of God, or did what was right in the eyes of God. Almost every other king you see, it starts with, if we just pop back, Amon was 22 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 2 years in Jerusalem, and he did what was evil in the sight of God. Every other king starts with that. Did what was evil in the sight of God. Not a good king, horrible king, not a good guy, did awful, evil things. Turned this nation to darkness. They turned to idols and other gods, and just it was a mess every time one of these kings took over. Just never worked out. And then, so we have a whole nation that for generations has been steeped in darkness, has turned from God. They have taken these other gods, they've worshipped at their temples, they're just completely far away from what God intended them to be. And God's answer, right, is to send a third grader to be king, right? And you say, why a third grader? Well, because, we'll see in just a second, this guy was 8 years old. You're completely wrong, right? So here we go. Chapter 34, 2 Chronicles starts, verse 1 says, Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign. All right, so an 8-year-old. My youngest son is in third grade. My oldest son. We'll edit that out. So my oldest son is 8. He's in third grade. That would literally be like him for some reason becoming president of the United States. I'm pretty sure nuclear codes, okay? We're talking cabinet meetings that would have to stop by 2 for nap time. There's a lot of, just think about an 8-year-old king. I think if you've read this story before, you're okay, yeah, he was 8. That's pretty young to become king. But everything that goes into that, right? Like state like dinners, is that peanut butter and jelly? Like what are they, like there's just, it's a child.
You do know that child can usually have older reasons, right?
He's 8 years old, right? God chooses to make this 8-year-old kid king when his nation is just completely overwhelmed by idols and darkness. Not this great warrior, not this leader of men that everybody wants to lead. He sends an 8-year-old. And so we're going to look at why did he do that? What can we learn from this 8-year-old, right? We can see in the Bible, like, do you know that other people look down on you because you're young? We're like, yes, that. But like, this guy was 8, leading a country. And it wasn't because he was smart. Lucas, I need you to be quiet, okay? It wasn't because he was the smartest. It wasn't because he was like top of his second grade class and I thought, you know what, this guy, he needs to skip up to king, right? God chose him for a reason. And we're going to look at what stood out about this guy. What really made a difference that God said, yes, this is the one I'm going to use. This is the person I'm going to use. So he was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. So you do the math. He reigned until he was how old? 39. Great job, everybody. And he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and walked in the ways of David, his father. No, David was not his father. This is more accurately translated by David, his ancestor, right? So basically, David, known as a man after God's own heart, also screwed up, did a lot of awful things too. But God says, hey, everything that Josiah is doing well, he's modeling after what David did well. So this is a guy that's doing everything right that David did, and he's not doing the bad stuff too. So he's basically saying, hey, this guy is walking with me well. All right? He walked in the ways of David, his father, and he did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. All right? So basically, he was not distracted by anything. He was focused. He was just completely present in what was going on, did not let everything that was going on. Again, an 8-year-old. My 8-year-old, when it's time to get our backpack and go to school, is distracted by things. And he doesn't have to run Arnold, let alone a country. Think of how hard that is for an 8-year-old to not be distracted by stuff, but God was with him and he did it. So, and then it says, for in the 8th year of his reign, while he was yet a boy, he began to seek the God of David, his father, and in the 12th year he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the Asherim, and the carved in the metal images. So what is going on here? Like we have this country that's a mess. We have a king who's 8, who God has put in place. And so why did God use him? Because he was ready to be used by God, yes. But two main things that we see here, right? One thing, even before we get to those two, is this. That I think we need to understand that it's possible to do what is right and not be pursuing God. Okay, start with that. You can make right choices, you can do right things, you can do good things, and you're not walking with God. You say, well, how is that? Well, look, I mean, you could not know Jesus, but think, hey, there's a person that's on the side of the road, I'm going to stop and give him a bottle of water. Like, that's a nice, good thing. It doesn't mean you're walking with God, though. But the actions don't necessarily mean that. Like, you can do a good act without following or pursuing God. And we see that for 8 years of his reign, he did what was right in God's eyes. Right? He was a good guy. He did the right things. He did the good things that David did. He wasn't like distracted. He was a good king for all intents and purposes. But something happened when he was 16. Something happened 8 years later. Some of you guys are 16. Can you imagine being king for the last 8 years? Like you just stopped picking your nose like 4 years ago. All right? Some of you still working on it. You'll get there, okay? And after eight years of being a good king, like that in and of itself is a feat. The 8-year-old was a better king than any of the previous kings that had come before, except for maybe a guy like David or Solomon. Right? But after 8 years of his reign, it says this, while he was yet a boy, he began to seek the God of David, his father. All right, so the number one thing that makes him usable by God was that he pursued God, is that he sought God. Not just, hey, I'm going to be a good king, I'm going to do good things, but I will pursue and run after and desire and long for God. Being good is not good enough. I will pursue God. He walked in the ways of David, yes. He didn't waver in his pursuit. Why? Think about this. It says in his 8th year, he started to pursue God, and in his 12th year, he did something else. So 4 years is that gap. We can be so focused on the instantaneous that's okay, now I'm going to choose to follow God. Glad I've done that. What's next? And he says, I am going to pursue God, and I'm going to pour myself into this. And 4 years later, then he acted out of it. And for 4 years, he just pursued God. What does it say to us is that if you look, again, if you want to be depressed, read basically 1st and 2nd Chronicles of just kings that did awful things, were selfish, just cared about themselves, brought evil on their land. There's a track record in this nation of train wreck after train wreck after train wreck, awful, dark, evil things. But a 16-year-old stopped that train wreck track. Right? They didn't continue down that road, and it stopped when he said, I will pursue God. And I will pour myself into that. Right? A track record of failure can be stopped. That can be stopped in your life. It can be stopped in your friend group. It can be stopped in your family. Just because it's happened for a long time doesn't mean it has to continue. And Josiah said, hey, I am pursuing God. I don't care what the kings before me did. That they enriched themselves, that they sold out our nation to make themselves more powerful, whatever they did. I don't have to do that same thing. I will pursue God. Some takeaways for us in that your personal pursuit of God can lead others to pursue God as well. If we fast forward to the very end, this 8-year-old, the age of a 3rd grader, turns this country around, turns this nation around. And it started in his own personal pursuit of God. Your personal pursuit of God can change the world, but you will not change anything if you're not first changed by God, if you don't first pursue him. And it's a long-term commitment, not a one-time act. And it's going to require focus and discipline. Think of the stuff that we get overwhelmed by. Think of the stuff that we have to do. There's a lot. There's a lot of plates that you have in the air, things you try to keep going in your life. You say, man, if I'm going to pursue God, it's I don't know if I can do that. Well, if it's a 16-year-old kid who's leading the country, cannot turn to the right or to the left and stay focused and say, I will pursue God, we can handle it too. It just takes making some tough choices in our lives. It takes saying, this is the thing that my life is about. This is what I'm running after. This is what I'm pursuing. Nothing else is going to get in the way of that. I hope nothing gets in the way, but you set in the tone for your life that says nothing else will get in the way. Nothing will stop me from going where God is taking me. All right? Focus and discipline. So what is the result of that? Right? So he says, all right, I am going to pursue God, and after 4 years of the pursuing God, it leads him to act. Right? Pursuing God will always lead you to act in your life. It's not just to acquire knowledge of God. It's not just to say, now I know more about God. It will always lead to action, because if you are truly pursuing him, you'll become more like him. And if you're becoming more like him, you will realize that the world around you, that the stuff around you, that the stuff that is in your life needs to change, or it's not going to fit with you as you're becoming more like him. So what does he do, right? In his 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the Asherim and the carved and metal images. What the heck does that mean, right? And they go on. It says, and they chopped down the altars of the Baals in his presence, and he cut down the incense altars that stood above them, and he broke in pieces the Asherim and the carved and the metal images, and he made dust of them and scattered it over the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. A little bit overkill there, right? He also burned the bones of the priests, wow, going way beyond that, on their altars to cleanse Judah and Jerusalem, and in the cities of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, and as far as Naphtali, Naphtali in their ruins all around. He broke down the altars and beat the Asherim and the images into powder and cut down all the incense altars throughout all the land of Israel. Then he returned to Jerusalem. The dude needs to chill out, right? That was my thought when I realized, okay, we get it. You tore everything down, you ground it to dust, you beat the tar out of it, like you destroyed everything. We get you weren't a fan, right? What does he do? His pursuit of God leads to purging of idolatry, right? Who all seen the movie The Purge? Oh, no, caught you. No, I'm just kidding. Right? Though I've not seen it, but the premise, right? It's, hey, one night we're just going to wreak havoc and we will destroy everything. Anything goes. This idea of like total wipeout of everything that you don't want. It's fair game. And this idea of purging is completely to get rid of, to just completely have it gone, right? When my dog takes a deuce in the yard, we purge the yard. It's not like, oh, we'll just leave it in this corner and just not go in that corner of the yard. No, like, get rid of it. It's completely gone, right? It's this idea of, okay, I am overwhelmingly revolted by this. We have gone on some mission trips, and I've had to do some things in my life that I never thought of when I thought I'm going to be a youth pastor, right? I never thought we'd be in Denver and I'd be going to Walgreens next door because someone decided to not flush early enough, and we had a toilet, to the brim. Surface just tension was the only thing holding everything in this toilet. The color was unspeakable. I could not tell what was going on here. All I knew is I'm breathing through my mouth and wearing gloves and then taking about 6 showers and then probably just soaking in bleach because, dear Lord, what happened here? Okay? No one even was going in that restroom. Again, I'm not even going to give you the gross stuff. This is just an overview, right? It was one of those that you walk in, like, how do I even start to clean this up? Like, we can't even plunge, or it's going all over the floor. It's just the low point of my life as a youth pastor was that toilet in Denver. And so we just cup it, dumping it out. This is awful, horrible. But, right? It wasn't like someone was going into that restroom like, you know what? It's fine, I'll use it. But no one touched that thing until that thing was cleaned out. And then we made sure, hey, do not ever do that again. As I am not cleaning that up again. It was extremely gross, right? But it's this idea, I'm so revolted by something, I can't just let it be here. I can't just let it stay. You would not do that in your house, right? If, again, we're just thinking of gross things. We're having pie and cupcakes later. It'll be so much just better. But if there's vomit or something gross in your house, you're not like, oh, just in the living room, we'll just put a coffee table over it, it'll be fine. You're like, no, that's disgusting, we need to get rid of it. That's the attitude they had about the idolatry, right? Why is it a big deal? Well, look back at what God's rules were. Hey, do not have any other gods before me. And all of these other kings had said, nah, it's fine. Well, I like their God. They have a cool temple. The king gets good stuff. He gets to get rich off it. That's fine. And they said, hey, we're just going to have these other gods. We're going to do it. And darkness overcame their country. Completely overcame it. And they're everywhere. And they go through all these towns, and there's these idols to different gods. There's all these different things with these temples for these different gods. And the pursuit of God drove Josiah to the point of, I have to purge this. I am completely just disgusted and overwhelmed with how awful this is. I cannot be okay with this. It has to go. And this was to the point where it didn't just say, hey, Kyle, go ahead and take care of this. Right, I'm going back to my pals. He went to every town, and they cut them down in front of him. And it says, okay, we took it down, we chopped them down, we cut them down, we ground them to dust, we burned them. It's like, holy smokes. Well, think about it, right? You have an idol, big metal idol that they've made. You don't be like, okay, I guess we'll just put that in storage, right? Where it can be pulled out again. Where it can be brought back out okay, well, we went through a phase of where we weren't going to do that, but we kind of like it. Let's put it back. But they got to a point of there is no going back. We're melting this thing down. We are crushing it. We're chopping it up. There will be nothing left of this. Completely destroyed. They talk about grinding them down, right? And he made dust of them. Scattered it over the graves of those who had sacrificed him. He also burned the bones of the priest on their altars and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. Think of taking a stone statue, not just we're going to break it up into pieces and it's like gravel. It's like, hey, we're grinding this up. It's going to be like sand. And then just in case someone got the bright idea, we're going to put this together and go get every grain of sand back here and put it back together, we're going to sprinkle it all over. It's impossible to go back. That has to be the attitude that we have with the idols in our lives. Now, you probably don't have a giant golden statue of Baal in your living room. It's a god. Baal is a god, yeah. So if you do, I'd suggest getting rid of it, okay? But we have different idols in our lives. And you know what those things are. Those things you say that I worship them. You may not say I actually worship them, but your life reflects that. What do you spend your time on? What do you spend your money on? What gets your affection? What gets your attention? Those are your idols. If anything gets more than God. I was talking to someone right about the end of I think it was maybe last week or two, talking about how my life has changed so much. When I was in college, March Madness would come on. And we saved up these skip days for the classes, like you get 5 or 6 a year, like, okay, I'm using those in March. You will not see me for quite a while. And it worked out very well. Eastern time zone, so I got done with a class, an 8 o'clock class, got done around 10. Game started right around then, right? So we'd go get lunch quick, then go back to our dorm room, and would not leave until there was a dinner break about 7, go get some dinner quick, and then come back and watch games until 11 o'clock and do this for about a month. I'm not saying it's good. There's some sadness in that. Okay, right? But as well, and me and Ashley were dating at the time. We had an understanding that, like, hey, you're not going to see me for a while. Okay? We have moved our beds out of our dorm room, put them in another guy's room. We had double-decker couches like Lego Movie, okay? We took our mattresses off, put a couch up on top, not up to code. The RA was fine with it because he got to come in and watch. We had a projector on the wall, different than TVs. Like, again, it sounded cool when I was 22. It's really sad looking back, okay? So we do that. But then, there's that. Football season 2, it's like, hey, there's the Thursday night game. Friday night, Ashley, we can spend some time together. Saturday, games the whole day. Sunday, NFL. Then Monday night, right? It's just like, I watched a ridiculous amount of sports with my life. And then I got married, and Ashley apparently was not cool with that amount of sports, right? And so like, okay, college football's gone, I'll just do pro, and that slowly faded away to when I have kids, like, okay, I'll watch just the Bears, and maybe some of the college on my tournament. Now my life is, I may catch a quarter of the Bears if they're a nationally televised game. Yeah. Go Bears, yeah. We don't have a first round pick, but it's fine. And the NCAA tournament, which I used to watch every game of, this year I think I watched a game and a half. Shocking, absolutely shocking. There was a point in my life that watching sports was an idol, right? It got my time, it got my energy, it got my skip days for class. We had some highs with it too. It was enjoyable, it was good. It wasn't like, oh, this is the worst, I'm in idolatry now. Like, no, it was enjoyable, we had fun. The janitors at the school, their wives would make like brownies and snacks, and they'd bring them and come watch the game with us on break. It was an awesome time in life. It was also idolatry, though. Why? Because I didn't have a quiet time during the time. I got no time. I'm checking stats and game times, right? We have idols in our lives. And your response to idols in your life, whether that's a relationship, whether that's a certain, hey, I want to be on this team, I want to be a part of this, there's goals I have for this. Again, idols aren't always horrible, awful things. They can be good things that take you away from God. And if you're pursuing God, your response should be, I hate this so much, I will purge this from my life. It sounds extreme, it sounds hard, and it is. It's saying this thing that I've given everything of me to needs to be gone from my life because Jesus is my life. And we just have to make those tough choices. Right? In his pursuit of God, he said that like idolatry cannot coexist with it. That I can't be, all right, God, I'm going to pursue you and have everything else. It's God, I'm pursuing you and that's it. That the result of his pursuit was zero tolerance policy. What does that look like? What is the takeaway for us? Wholehearted pursuit of God means I will destroy the idols in my life. And you know what they are. Write them down. Make a list. Do whatever you need to do to just like confront those in your life. It may be good things. Right? What is your idol? And if you're pursuing God, does it disgust you to the point where I have to purge this? I will grind it up, get rid of it, do whatever. But it will not get in the way. And if I'm serious about getting rid of idols, it has to be like destruction, not just removal. Because removals can come back. But destruction is done for good. You have to be serious about those things. Right? We cannot say these are the 2 or 3 things in my life that have my affection, my time, my money, everything that I give is to them. And I know I want to just pursue God, so I kind of need to get those things just out of the way for a while. So I'm going to put them off to the side. Because you will come to a point where you're just pursuing God that it gets hard. And you will come to a point where you're like, I've done this for a long time. I just need a break. And you will come to a point where you say, is it really worth it? And you're going to be so tempted if you have those right at the ready to pull those idols back into your life. Is it a boyfriend or girlfriend? Or hey, we just need to just take a little bit of break. Let's ease off a little bit. But it's still there. Right? Maybe it's, hey, I am a part of this team. This is my sport. This is my thing, band, whatever it may be. This is my deal. And if I say, well, I'll just pursue God and do this. It's pretty clear from God's word that idols cannot coexist with God. Are you willing to get rid of it and completely cleanse your life of that? We fast forward into this life of this guy. He rules for 31 years, and we come to a point to where he makes this covenant with God. He makes a pledge to God that he will follow him, that he will live for him, that he'll walk with him. And he leads this nation to make that same pledge. People that worshiped idols. People that worked in these temples to these other gods. People that had given their lives to them, and their lives were destroyed and overcome with evil and darkness. And they turned back because of an 8-year-old king who made a choice and said, I will pursue God. And in that pursuit, it leads him to purge like idolatry from his life and from his kingdom. And a nation is led back to God as a result of it. Your team, your family, your school, your workplace, your friend group, it may be dark, it may be not necessarily evil, it may be taking you away from God, but it doesn't have to continue. God came into the world to redeem the world and bring it back to him. He used an 8-year-old kid to bring a country back to him. He can use you to bring your friends, your family, your workmates, your teammates, whatever, back to him. But it starts with you pursuing him and not allowing like idolatry to stand in your life. And that can spread, but it starts with one person that's willing to say that. Why was Josiah a dark horse? He was 8, okay? 8 years old. He probably couldn't use the toaster by himself without help. Right? Couldn't reach the microwave. But he could pursue God. There's a history of kings that did evil. There's a track record. Everybody else may be okay with the current state of things, but he says, I am not. And you have a country steeped in darkness. We have a culture that is pretty dark. We have a culture that has idols. Not the guy that I would have chosen if it was up to me, but God knows what he's doing. Why? Because he saw a guy who said, I will pursue God and I'll purge idolatry. That's the formula. right? If you want to be used by God, we looked at like Deborah, and she stood up, she spoke up, and she stepped out. And we look at this life of like Josiah, and he pursued God, and he purged idolatry. It's not rocket science. You don't have to be the brightest and the smartest. Some of the most used people by God are simple, plain people that other people would say they're dumb, like John, not exactly like great, who's not a bad guy. Paul, he had a hunchback, ugly. I mean, let's just be honest, right? It's like, this is the guy who will lead my people, the guy who just like looks like Quasimodo, right? Like, but God used him. And he uses the people who take him at his word and say, I will pursue and run after you, and I will not let idolatry stand in my life. If I want to be used by God, I don't have to be the best and brightest, but I have to relentlessly pursue him and purge idolatry. And again, I don't have to give you this big description of what an idol is. You know what has your life. There's something popping in your head right now. You're like, well, if I was honest, it's this. Or you know the stuff that has you. It may be evil, it may be not so bad. But you have idols in your life. The question is, if you're pursuing God, are you willing to purge them and get rid of them? Completely just gone. Ground up. Sprinkle the ashes over a wide range so it cannot ever be put back together, because your heart is God's, your life is God's, and nothing will take your attention off of him. And if you do that, you may have the slowest 40 time on your team. You may not be able to carry a tune in a bucket. You may not understand osmosis. You may not understand the ridiculous things that other people grasp and understand. You may be the dumbest person in your class. You finished dead last, right, in your class rank. You can still be used by God.